Samsung and Hynix, and how well, first of all, are they positioned to ride out any wrinkles from the tariff relationship between the US and China?
On the 22nd of May 2026, a hardware enthusiast posting under the username WXNod shared a set of screenshots on X that caused genuine alarm inside the global memory industry. The screenshots showed a Corsair Vengeance DDR5 module, one of the most recognizable gaming memory products on the market, running through CPU-Z and HWINFO64 diagnostic software. Those tools read exactly which company manufactured the actual DRAM dies sitting underneath the metal heat spreader. The manufacturer listed was not Micron, which is where Corsair normally sources its chips. It was not Samsung. It was not SK Hynix. The manufacturer listed was Changshin Memory Technologies, better known as CXMT, a Chinese semiconductor company that only a few years ago was barely visible outside its domestic market. The part number on the module was CMK5X16G3E60C36A2-CN. The CN suffix denotes a China market product. The module ran at DDR5 6000 with CL36 timings at 1.35 volts, supporting both Intel XMP and AMD Expo profiles. It also carries UKCA and CE certification marks, meaning it meets British and European safety standards for retail sale. In other words, this is not a prototype sitting beneath laboratory lights. It is a retail product from one of the most trusted brands in PC gaming, and the chips inside it came from China. Tom's Hardware, Tech Power Up, The Next Web, and multiple other major hardware publications covered this discovery within hours. The consensus was immediate. This is not a minor supply chain curiosity. It is a signal that something structural is shifting in one of the most important and most concentrated industries in all of consumer technology. To understand why one photograph of a RAM stick matters this much, you need to understand what has happened to the global memory market in the past 18 months, because the context is the story. The DRAM industry is one of the most brutally concentrated markets on Earth. For decades, virtually every computer, phone, laptop, server, and gaming console has depended on memory chips from the same three companies: Samsung, SK Hynix, and Micron. That concentration is not an accident. Building a DRAM manufacturing operation requires billions of dollars in equipment, years of engineering expertise, extremely precise manufacturing process control, and the financial resilience to survive the brutal cycles of oversupply and price collapse that periodically devastate memory margins. Every time there is a downturn, smaller producers get wiped out. Every time the surviving companies emerge, they are stronger. By the early 2020s, the three-company dominance was so complete that module brands like Corsair, Kingston, and G-Skill were essentially packaging businesses. They bought dies from Samsung, SK Hynix, or Micron, assembled them onto circuit boards, and competed on overclocking profiles, cooling design, and branding. The actual silicon was always from the same short list. Then the AI boom arrived, and it broke the consumer memory market in a way nobody had fully planned for. Samsung and SK Hynix jointly warned in late April 2026 that AI-driven memory shortages are expected to persist through 2027 and beyond, with hyperscalers booking supply years ahead. The reason is high bandwidth memory, the specialized DRAM stacked vertically inside AI accelerators like NVIDIA's H-series chips. HBM moves enormous amounts of data at extraordinary speeds, and it commands far higher margins than ordinary consumer DDR5. Micron has explained publicly that producing a given amount of HBM can require approximately 3 times the wafer capacity needed for the same quantity of conventional DDR5 bits, with future generations potentially requiring even more. So as Samsung, SK Hynix, and Micron redirect their manufacturing lines toward premium AI memory products, the supply available for desktop computers, gaming rigs, and laptops has tightened dramatically. DDR5 prices have risen sharply throughout 2026. PC builders are paying significantly more for ordinary RAM than they were 2 years ago, and the companies that used to supply that RAM are too busy servicing NVIDIA and the hyperscalers to prioritize the consumer end of the market. This is the gap that CXMT is walking into. Changxin Memory Technologies was founded in 2016 in Hefei, China. It is young by the standards of the industry it is trying to compete in. Samsung's semiconductor history runs back decades. Micron was founded in the late 1970s. SK Hynix traces its origins through a long chain of companies and acquisitions. CXMT entered this race approximately 4 generations behind. Its strategic constraint is also well understood. U.S. export controls have blocked the sale of ASML's EUV lithography equipment to Chinese chipmakers, which means CXMT cannot manufacture the most advanced memory nodes using the most current process technology. The established companies are all racing to adopt the next generation of production processes. CXMT is doing what it can with older tooling and catching up through engineering discipline rather than equipment advantage. But here is what makes the Corsair discovery so significant in 2026. Catching up does not require matching the absolute frontier. It requires reaching good enough. CXMT's current DDR5 portfolio includes dies at 16 gigabits and 24 gigabits, with advertised speeds up to 8,000 megatransfers per second. Its Q1 2026 revenue reached 50.8 billion yuan, equivalent to approximately 7.4 billion US dollars, up 719% year-on-year. The company swung from a loss of 2.83 billion yuan in Q1 2025 to a net profit of 33 billion yuan in Q1 2026. Those are not the numbers of a company producing prototype memory in a laboratory. Those are the numbers of a company that has found customers at scale. CXMT holds approximately 7.7% of the global DRAM market, and its clients already include Alibaba, Tencent, and ByteDance. The question after May 22nd is whether Corsair is next. The 24 gigabit die deserves specific attention because it represents one of the most tactically intelligent moves in CXMT's product strategy. For years, consumer desktop memory shipped in configurations based on doubling 8 gigabytes, 16, 32, 64, 100, and 28. 24 gigabit dies break that pattern. Place 8 of them on a module and you get a 48 gigabyte stick. That fills a gap that the standard doubling progression skips entirely. A creator editing video might not need 64 gigabytes, but could genuinely benefit from having more than 32. Someone running a local AI model might want 96 gigabytes without paying for 128. The 24 gigabit configuration is not a technical record. It is a practical answer to a real need, and it gives CXMT a way to compete through configuration rather than simply on price or raw speed. The geopolitical context adds another layer to this story. CXMT previously faced U.S. sanctions, but multiple restrictions were lifted earlier in 2026, according to reporting from Ground News and other outlets. That policy shift means CXMT-based memory can now be sold outside China with fewer barriers than previously existed. The former chief of Samsung's semiconductor business observed publicly this year that CXMT is aggressively expanding capacity and could materially alter the consumer DRAM market by the second half of 2027. When the person who used to run Samsung's chip division uses the word aggressively to describe a Chinese competitor's expansion, it is worth treating that description seriously. There is one more piece of the picture that almost nobody is discussing, and it concerns Samsung specifically. Samsung's largest union launched an 18-day strike threat starting in late May 2026. South Korea's prime minister warned publicly that the industrial action could cost up to 668 million US dollars per day. If that strike materialized and constrained Samsung's already tight consumer DRAM output further, the timing could not have been more convenient for CXMT. The window for a new supplier to enter a market is always widest when the established suppliers are either constrained by higher margin priorities or disrupted by internal problems. In May 2026, both conditions were simultaneously true. The question the hardware community is genuinely asking is whether CXMT memory is reliable enough. A DDR5 specification on a datasheet is not the same as independently validated long-term stability across temperature ranges, voltage margins, and millions of hours of real-world use. Memory can fail in ways that are deceptive. A system boots normally, runs daily tasks fine, then produces a crash after several hours of heavy load. That is why serious qualification takes time and why server customers are particularly demanding. What the Corsair module provides is a first reference point. Major consumer memory brands validate components before putting their name and warranty on a retail product. Corsair selling a kit with CXMT chips suggests the company has done at least a baseline level of compatibility and stability testing. That is not a full independent qualification, but it is not nothing. It allows the next potential customer to ask, how did Corsair's experience go, rather than has anyone ever tried this at all? That is a fundamentally different and easier conversation. The immediate impact of all this on RAM prices is limited. CXMT's current monthly wafer output is approximately 240,000 units, roughly half of SK Hynix's capacity and about a third of Samsung's, according to market research firm Omdia. That is not enough volume to force prices down in the near term. But the trajectory matters more than the current snapshot. CXMT's revenue grew 719% year-on-year. Its capacity is expanding. Its products are now inside a Corsair retail kit bearing the UKCA mark for British market compliance. The former chief of Samsung's semiconductor division is talking about it publicly. Financial analysts are cautioning that Chinese suppliers pushing DDR5 volumes could have a chilling effect on memory prices into 2027. The Corsair discovery on the 22nd of May 2026 is not the end of Samsung and Micron's dominance of the memory industry. It is the beginning of the end of the period when that dominance was uncontested. There is a pattern in technology markets that repeats so consistently it has almost become a law. A new supplier enters at the bottom of the market, dismissed as too basic, too unreliable, or too far behind the frontier to matter. Then it ships more units. It learns from the failures. It reduces cost. It gains another customer. A component that arrived in one regional product ends up in another brand, then another, then a laptop maker tests it, then a server customer qualifies it for lower priority workloads. Nothing dramatic appears to happen, and then the supplier is simply part of the normal ecosystem. This is not speculation about CXMT. It is the history of Samsung, which built its memory business by entering a market dominated by American and Japanese producers, and then outcompeting them over decades of sustained manufacturing investment. The question for 2026 is not whether CXMT has matched Samsung. It clearly has not. The question is whether the conditions that allowed Samsung to eventually become the world's largest memory manufacturer are now available to CXMT. The AI boom pulling premium manufacturing capacity upward while leaving consumer DRAM undersupplied is exactly the kind of structural opening that allowed previous entrants to establish a foothold that later became permanent. One Corsair module with a Chinese die, one part number ending in CN, the beginning of something that may look obvious in 10 years, and that almost nobody is taking seriously enough right now.